I might hand over to Mark to give some introductions into this context of flipping the narrative on inequity of the bush versus city. And here I'm taking a little bit of a career span approach because Mark has a focus on legal education in the higher education context. Annika can then talk to what she is seeing from law graduates through the PLT programs that she works with. And I think Michelle can then speak especially to what she is seeing and supporting through New South Wales regional women lawyers in those who are located and practicing in Triple R areas.
Okay, thanks so much, Hayley. And I'll acknowledge the Biripi people, the Biripi land that we're upon, and pay my respects to all First Nations people in the room here today. I was really honoured and excited this morning to listen again to Uncle Bill. He held up a book that my father had done the artwork on. The Place of Banishment was actually illustrated by my late father, who was a prominent artist in Kempsey. So even though you've heard that I've returned to Port Macquarie last year, I spent my first 18 years in Kempsey and then went to study in Canberra and become an academic in ANU before moving to Charles Sturt, excuse me, to do work as the director of the Centre for Law and Justice, but to be based in Canberra and spending every second week in Bathurst. So apart from the warmth of returning to not only Biripi land, but also some connections with Dunghutti elders and folks that I went to school with, for example, I've had this wonderful experience out in Bathurst on Wiradjuri land with Wiradjuri elders, heavily involved in their commemoration of the bicentenary of the Declaration of Martial Law over the Wiradjuri people. So look, it's been a wonderful journey for me. So in terms of flipping the narrative, having been an 18-year-old going to study in Canberra, freezing myself to bits, and then coming back and doing all the things I had, being around the world as an academic and whatnot, in cross-cultural situations and everything else. I think it's really important to have high-ranking academics and other people coming to a new university like Charles Sturt in Port Macquarie and being good role models and encouragers for people who don't want to leave their local communities to study or to work. If they do, give them the support in that decision, but also give people online educational opportunities and other opportunities to stay close to country and to family and to community. And that's what flipping the narrative is all about, and probably also understanding for me that not all students want to be dislocated from family and relationships, for example. So as well as those role model type of activities, it's pride in giving back to your local community. And every day for me is a revisiting of childhood memories and consideration of what's developed since I was in this community as an 18-year-old. Flipping the narrative, I think, is also understanding for law students and legal practitioners, young practitioners and other practitioners, career changes in particular too, coming into law. That even though they might have started off in a city, that's not where they want to be, or they're not the legal problems they want to work with. And understanding the real thirst that there is to get people who have had city backgrounds and city educations to understand the problems here. So I can only point to some really inspirational work that I was involved with at ANU, and that was the Law Reform and Social Justice project at a volunteer project, which then developed some for-credit subjects. But I used to take volunteers and then for-credit students into the Alexander McConaughey Centre and teach law to detainees. That gave people who had only grown up in Canberra, for example, an exposure to people in detention and to understand what it means to be a lawyer, having to work closely as a communicator of the law to many different groups. There was a real thirst amongst some of those volunteer students and other students, even though they had a city background, to really understand what's going on in the rest of Australia. And there was a real need to educate some of those people about what regional communities were like. And for me, I'll end there, that's an important fact not to underestimate. There are a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds that are wanting to work in 3R and 4R communities and should do and can do with the support of us all.
Mark, can I ask then, from your experience with the Council of Law Deans, how we can work R into the curriculum of law and what's on the Council of Law Deans called, another acronym for you guys. Everyone loves an acronym. What's on their agenda?
Yeah. So when you are the head of a law program, there's very few deans, so-called, anymore because of the restructuring of universities. But you get to go to the Council of Australian Law Deans Council meetings 3 to 4 times a year. I ended up, as you've heard, as the co-chair of the First Peoples Partnership with Deans and high-ranking First Nations legal academics, trying to advocate for the Council of Australian Law Deans to do a whole range of things. Mainly that was focused on the embedding of Indigenous cultural competence elements into mandatory compulsory law subjects across the entire curriculum. And I worked really quite closely with a whole bunch of people who were doing that in their universities. So if you know of people at UTS, Associate Professor Marcel Burns, Gomeroi woman, Professor Asmi Wood at ANU, Professor Eddie Cabillo, then at University of Melbourne, Professor Nicole Watson from UTS, Professor Amberlynn Quay-Mulliner from UWA, and Professor Corinda Burns at La Trobe, for example, now. She was at UWA. Doing this sort of work on embedding into the curriculum, Indigenous co-design and Indigenous knowledges and perspectives on social justice issues in a legal curriculum. Having said all of that, the prominence of actually having subjects in curriculum that are focused on 3R and 4R type of issues was almost silent in the debates around these types of issues, even in CALD. There's an obvious place for the First Peoples Partnership and the curriculum guidance. We've got resources on the website, all sorts of things that we were providing from our universities. But whether that was really a focus on 3R and 4R or community legal centres, I really think that some of that needs to be discussed even more at CALD, and there needs to be a more explicit link made there. And depending on which day you ask my colleagues on the First Peoples Partnership as well, there needs to be more of active listening by the law deans around Australia to that as well. Just quickly on the agenda of CALD, I haven't been on it for a year or so, is what's called Australian Legal Education 2030 and Beyond. It's a project responding to work that Professor Sally Kift and her colleague Nakano have done into a report to try to think about what around the country and the world is being done about practical legal training, pre-admission, post-admission, CPD type of training, and the way in which universities and practitioners and peak bodies of practitioners should be involved in that. So that's the consultation between CALD and the Law Council of Australia, LAC, the Legal Services Council, APLEC, and the Australian Law Students Association, for example. Beyond that, you know, there's a lot of work that CALD does to try to understand what the regulatory authorities in each state are doing. Do they really understand what legal education is about? Do they really understand what online legal education is about that gives access to people who don't want to leave home to go to study? Do they really understand how we operate an online law degree or assess in one? LAC and LPABs have all sorts of reactions to AI and other threats. So trying to tell us how many % has to be in vigilated assessment, you know, compulsory law subjects. And then finally, what a lot of CALD does is worry about university accord and other policy programs of the government, funding, international student caps, budget realities.
Thanks, Mark. So just to give a promo for those who haven't heard me wax on over the last few days of one of the subjects that I have the privilege of teaching at CSU. Law 314 is a community law and culture capstone unit embedded within the Bachelor of Laws at Charles Sturt University, which means every student has to do this before they graduate. Fortunately, we have a number of students who study cross-institutionally as well because it's just such a terrific subject. But it really aims to sensitise students to the realities of practice in RRR settings. And part of the key components are introducing students to the different parts of the legal assistance sector, talking about funding arrangements, the history of activism, like really inspiring material that often they have not heard before even though they are soon to graduate. We also embed within that teaching reflective practice, law reform, sort of like mock scenarios, as well as following some real situations, professional skills, career mapping, and importantly, cultural competency, which is carried through the entirety of our law degree, but comes together with a whole day cultural immersion with Wiradjuri elders as well.
I'll just comment on that. I started my time at Charles Sturt at the worst pointy end of COVID. So the elders in residence there, the Wiradjuri, Bathurst-based Wiradjuri elders were saying to me, well, how are we going to do a cultural immersion if we can't really get people to come to Bathurst anymore and get out onto country? And for a whole range of other reasons about access to country at times, they took GoPros out and videoed country. So it was just video of country. And then they were able to overlay live for our students online stories that they wanted to tell law students, stories they wanted to tell psychology students, and stories they wanted to tell engineering students in cultural immersions. Such a rich experience. And that continues to this day, twice a year as a cultural immersion. And it gives our students access to those elders, and those elders are also available to students in 2 other plenary sessions during our intensive school periods. So it's just given genuine and authentic interactions, not only between staff and the elders, but between the elders and students. And, at any one time, we might have around 7% First Nations students in our program in any event. And there's a lot of teaching from student to student as well.
It's true. And I think the model of this subject was really based on what's been done in some other disciplines like nursing and teacher education, where there's a recognition of that there is this recruitment and retention policy for having solicitors in RRR areas. And in order for people to stay in those areas, we need to prepare them better for the realities, which includes benefits as well as challenges of working in those different sectors and different geographical locations. So one more question, perhaps more personal for you, Mark, I'd like to hear, given that you've relocated back from Canberra to Port Macquarie, what are some of the pros and cons you would reflect on in making such a move for your career and for your family life?
Until the Port Macquarie floods, I was thinking how lucky I was that my 83-year-old mother hadn't relocated to the place of her birth in Lismore. But things have changed this year, haven't they? And despite all of that, moving home for me and close to home is not only warmer, but the people are warmer, the opportunities are different, the educational opportunities are different, the cohort of students coming through to us are different. The number of mature age, career-changing law students is just inspiring. The number of personal challenges that a lot of those career-changing, mature age students are juggling to get to even an online class live or to pick it up in a recorded fashion is just even better to see from the perspective of home in Port Macquarie than it was when I was in Canberra and making visits out to Bathurst. I suppose, it's been 35 years since I've been here. I would say that my first impressions were that maybe the Mid-North Coast and Port Macquarie, and I had some interactions with Kinchela Boys Aboriginal Corporation and other elders in Dunghutti elders in Kempsey and other events in Kempsey. Would I say that it appears to be a kinder, a more diverse and a more compassionate region? I would hope so. Though one story I do have is voting in my first election, having come here, was a Port Macquarie by-election, and the first person to give me a how to vote card claimed that there are only 2 genders and that we should make Port Macquarie great again. So like everywhere else in the world and in regional, rural, and remote and very remote Australia, there's a lot of globalized pressure on those who might have extremist ideologies to become emboldened and extremist in a way. So I'll just reflect on that. It's different to my childhood here, but nonetheless, I think these are not only social challenges, but regulatory challenges and professional challenges about giving, students a really good professional grounding in what it means to have embedded Indigenous cultural competence skills that you take through your professional life, for example, or what it means to understand diversity, what it means to understand deep valued experiences of people from different groups in society that some of the students may not have come across. So, there's been some really high points in terms of celebrating diversity in Port Macquarie since I've been here, some low points. But I think this is the reality that we're all facing globally at the moment in terms of what's happening around extremist ideologies and whatnot. And I am a social psychologist who studies counterterrorism and radicalization and extremism and a whole range of things. So it's not unrelated for me to be here and to be thinking through some of these issues as well. But on the whole, I love being here. I love being in my home region and knowing that there's a university here. I think there has been a reverse brain drain going on in a whole range of professions and disciplines, and may it continue. And if there was a university like Charles Sturt on my doorstep when I was 18, I might not have spent 35 years away.
Thanks, Mark. Annika, over to you now. If you could offer some initial thoughts on this flipping the narrative idea, especially with a focus on clinical legal education and your roles on the LCA and the Rural Issues Committees. Thanks, Annika. Can I just, to add to one of your points about the absence of RRR in the national standards for PLT, basically. It's interesting, isn't it? Because in the threshold learning outcomes for law, which the lax standards for what law graduates are expected to know and demonstrate and be able to show when they complete their Bachelor of Laws, in one of those outcomes is reference to ethics and professional responsibility, and specifically an ability to recognise and reflect upon the professional responsibility of lawyers in promoting justice and in service to the community. But I was looking for that in the PLT competencies, which reference ethics and professional responsibility, and then it's silent. Mark?
I'll just add one thing quickly, and I'd be interested to know if Annika's got any support from the Rural Universities Network. So at times, universities like to label themselves as the Group of 8 or the Innovation Universities. There is a label called the Rural Universities Network. My experience as being a member of CALD and the head of a law school and a law program was that the Rural Universities Network is an untapped resource that needs to be tapped more often as a faction within CALD, or maybe within APLEC, maybe within any interactions with LAC or any development of the TLOs or the APLEC standards. So the experience that some of those deans would have in the regional universities is more of an ad hoc invocation of the Rural Universities Network, and I'd like to see it more constant as a force around some of this discussion around 3R and 4R, but I'm not sure how the Rural Universities Network might be active at all in the PLT space, possibly not at all.
Thank you. Now, Michelle, can you tell us a little, with your role as president of New South Wales Regional Women Lawyers, which I have seen go from strength to strength in the last 2 years. It's building a community to support women lawyers, especially in RRR areas. Can you tell us a little more about the organisation's purpose and its current projects, and how you aim to support private solicitors, especially in the regions?
Sure, Hayley. Well, thank you for inviting me today, and I'd like to pay respects also to the traditional owners of the land here, the Biripi people, and acknowledge First Nations people here today. I've travelled here from Darkinjung country down south of here, Central Coast area, and I'm very fortunate to live on that land. In relation to New South Wales Regional Women Lawyers, so our organisation was established in February 2023, and the goal of this organisation is to really create a community of support for women practising in rural, regional and remote New South Wales. Was a group of about 5 or 10 of us who just felt dissatisfied with the current support for women practising in regional New South Wales, and we thought, why not just set up our own thing and have some good times together and build some support for each other. And the way we decided to do that is by holding regular conferences. So we started off with one in Orange in March 2023. The lovely Judy Harrison is here today, was one of our speakers at that conference. And it was extremely well attended. I think we had over 55 people in the room and people from around the state online. And what we learned from that conference is that a lot of women practicing in rural regional areas have a very satisfying, wonderful career, but they also sometimes feeling a bit isolated, and having that network really helps people relieve some of the stress and tension of practicing as a lawyer in these areas. We had people come to that conference who were like the only lawyer in town for an area of around, 100-kilometre radius. That creates all sorts of difficulties of potential conflicts and other issues that might never be faced by a solicitor, practicing in Chatswood or Newcastle. So we've also run webinars and advocate as well for this area. And we had another conference here in Port Macquarie in September, and the Charles Sturt University very kindly hosted our event there. And we have tried to partner with tertiary institutions in regional areas to so we can also promote the work to the students. We had a number of students come along to the Port Macquarie one, and they were really interested in the topics and just being able to meet other lawyers coming from all around the state and seeing what types of careers they could do. A couple of them said to us, because their whole delivery of their law degree now is online, they weren't actually having the opportunity to really meet face to face as other people and get ideas of what does it actually mean to be a lawyer, what would I have to do every day, and a variety of jobs. So that's been one thing that's been interesting. And then we also had a conference in Armidale last year, and we're having at the UNE where I did my law degree at University of New England, and that was also very well attended, and it was great to be able to get that flavour of the different regions. We're having our next conference in Dubbo on the 19th of September, and that's we've got some great speakers there. We've got a couple of topics, ones like coronial inquests in the bush and some of the difficulties that are happening with those type of coronial investigations in regional areas that are really particular to regional areas, some of those issues that arise. We're doing AI for lawyers, community lawyering in the bush, talking to some of the lawyers that helped in the floods and the work they did in their local communities after flooding in Central West, domestic violence in the bush. So a lot of lawyers who practice in regional and rural areas are very involved in their communities, way beyond the door of their office. They're sitting on boards of sporting bodies, or they're doing not-for-profit work and hearing how much they really enjoy that role. And I think law is really much more than just a job when you look at it like that, and it's really a privilege, like one of the other speakers have said. And I think in regional communities you even have more of an opportunity to be able to get involved in your community in that way. I actually started off doing my PLT at the Central Coast Community Legal Centre with Bronwyn Ambrogetti, I think is around somewhere today. And I did my PLT at ANU, which one of the other speakers has talked about. Travelled down there. I slept in my cousin's horse trailer for the time that I was down there doing that, out in a paddock somewhere. So look, I think there is so much exciting things happening in the law in regional and rural areas, lots of really challenging and interesting areas to work in. The first 3 years as solicitor, I was in a plaintiff litigation firm in Gosford, got thrown everything, just had to learn on the run, all sorts of manner of matters, workers' compensation, severity appeals, license appeals, anything the principal didn't want to do, I ended up having to do. And but you do get a lot of court time in regional areas. You do get to get down there and cut your teeth before magistrates and judges, and you learn also how to have good relations with other practitioners in your area, which is so important in being able to achieve good results for your clients. And ultimately, the organisation that we've established is really a lot of the members ran firms in regional and rural areas, and we're finding it more and more difficult to recruit staff, to retain staff, and that I think has worsened since COVID. And practices on the Central Coast I know were closing simply because they couldn't employ solicitors, and the principals had had enough. So it's a very real problem for access to justice, and I don't really need to explain that to anyone in this room probably, but not being able to access a lawyer and not being able to access a competent lawyer is a really big problem. And when we look at geographically the percentage of the state compared to, you know, population wise and the number of lawyers, this is something that really needs to be fixed, because it's impacting such a large proportion of the community. The HEX forgiveness scheme, which has been spoken about, is definitely something that we support, but obviously it involves some government willingness and funding. So, you know, I think we have to focus on other solutions which are achievable in a real practical sense now, because, you know, if the government was going to throw money at that, we probably would have seen it already. With the work that we've been doing, we've been trying to focus on showcasing the fantastic talent in regional and rural areas. So all our conferences, we invite local speakers, lawyers from the communities where we're hosting the conferences to talk about their work and to really focus on the positive contributions that they're making to their community, and just building that community of practice all across the state. And it has we've had a lot of good news stories come out of it.
I know I've met some really inspiring and innovative young women working in private practices in different areas through your conferences. And there seems to be a really supportive network there as well, willing to share resources and tips and tricks and lessons learned.
I think so. And that's one of the great things about the law is, you know, if you reach out for help and you ask for it, someone will willingly help you. It's a very collegiate profession, and even probably more so at the bar than as solicitors, but it's very much, you know, it's a profession where there's a ladder. So there's a clear pathway in the law from where you start off at, you know, law student, PLT, law grad, solicitor, barrister, up you go. And there's always someone above you that'll help you out if you reach out. And that's, I think, part of the purpose of the network that we're trying to build, is just letting people have more access to people like that. And I think with the bar, the problem for women, especially in the rural and regional areas who may wish to go to the bar, is the difficulty of, you have to, even if you pass the bar exam, you actually have to travel to Sydney for a month, do a full-time course at the bar practice course in the Bar Association in Phillip Street. So there's that real extra difficulty. You know, if you have young children, or you have to pay for accommodation in Sydney. So there are some barriers to that. And when we look at the number of women practicing at the bar, whilst solicitors, I think it's 52% women now at the bar, it's around 24%. And the top level of the bar, there's, I think, 15% women in senior counsel roles. So that is, for regional and rural areas, another barrier in terms of being able to progress to the higher levels of the profession. There are chambers at some of the regional locations around the state. Orange and Lismore, I think, have a chambers, but there is definitely room for improvement, and that's something we're working on as well.
I did have a look recently at the latest Urbis report on the national profile of solicitors across Australia. Just came out a couple of weeks ago, and that shows the proportionate representation of solicitors in, they say, country or rural areas has dropped from 12.5% in 2014 to 8% in 2024 figures. And I think a lot of that's related to influx of population generally into the regions in recent years, not the same proportionate influx of solicitors into those areas. And also for early career lawyers, so with less than 5 years experience, they are more concentrated still in the city compared to the total profession.
Well, I think one of the things, one of the sponsors that we had for one of our conferences was a bank, and they'd done some internal surveying and research, and the reason they wanted to sponsor us is that they'd found out that a lot of the regional firms are actually run by women, and so that was why they wanted to sponsor us. But there is, there is, once you get to that bar level, a disparity.
So how are we going for time? Okay, we're a little ahead of schedule, but I feel like there's a lot of burning questions here coming from the audience. Perhaps comments, maybe some critical commentary on what we've discussed. I'd really like to hear, of course, I can see Mark writing furiously as a typical academic, and he wants an opportunity to respond. But also to hear from the audience of any of these ideas. What do you think we should be capitalising on in order to attract more graduates, especially to RRR areas, or are there other things that we have not yet thought of? Yeah.
First of all, thanks to the panel for your insights and the work you're doing. I'm a community engagement worker. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm taking a much broader view. And I guess I've got two related questions to the panel. And I'm thinking about, the rates of urbanisation across the world. And really in the late 20th century, and we're probably still seeing it now, the city is ascendant. And we also tend to operate in binaries. So we're setting the city as the standard, and everything that is not the city is substandard. And I'm wondering, like, you're doing this work within law schools, fabulous, but I'm also wondering, is there a role for RRR communities to start to flip the narrative and to stop comparing ourselves to the cities and actually talk about what RRR is? And I know we have to play this game around advocating for services, for infrastructure, for funding, and often that is doing that juxtaposition to the city and using those stats. But I feel like we get bogged down and we start to take that on when we live here. And so can you just ask one sector to flip the narrative, or is there a broader role for the whole of communities to flip the narrative? That's the first question. The second question is particularly for academics and those working in those higher education institutes. Is there an ontological and epistemological issue here? Do we need to rethink what can be known and how can we know about RRR regions?
Thanks, Nat. And this is why one of your kids is a pure mathematician? No, I'm studying for you. Mark, would you like to go first?
I take the point about comparison and how comparison can be really negative to one's well-being, to one's understanding of career, to one's understanding of opportunity. And I think that's a really important point, that it's not better or worse, it's different, would be one response to all of that. And I think in some of the work that we try to do to bring solicitors, barristers, judicial officers who have had 3R, 4R experience in their lives or in their practice career to online plenary sessions where our students get to meet them, it is that the students do realise that it's not necessarily better or worse, it is just different. And these are district court judges that we've had talk about doing circuits, or at Bathurst they've now got a permanent circuit, which is a little bit of a smaller circuit than before. But it's someone who's in community for a longer period of time. That's different to what it was in the past, and it makes no sense to compare that judicial officer's experience in the law to someone who stayed in chambers in Sydney, for example, and became a Supreme Court judge or whatever. So I think that's the point about comparison, that it's not always about better and worse. It's about difference, and about where, I think Annika made a really good point. your values are congruent with that difference. And also just to be aware that there's diversity and opportunity that you may not be aware of until you live in those communities over time. So that's the first point. The second question was somewhat more challenging. And maybe it's just related to what I've just said, that you don't really know what the challenges are or what 3R or 4R life is until you're there, or you've spent a decent amount of time there. So actually holding out to our students that there is a stereotypical model of what 3R or 4R work is going to be would be wrong, you know, because Australia is a large place and place-based education is really important. But, you know, some of the elders that we work with would say place-based is great, but place-based is not telling you all about every nation in Australia. So obvious point there. So I'll leave it there as that attempt. Hayley?
I might just say though, when we question what we know or we think we know, I often ask students at the beginning of this subject, you know, what are the images that come to mind for you when we think of rural or regional or remote? And they might say red dirt or, you know, distance and things like that. And when I say, where do these ideas come from? Media. Yeah.
Typically draw on this rural idol. And you look at, you know, all these TV shows where someone from the city relocates and they're providing a professional service and they've got all these stereotypical characters that make up a small community. And I think that's what people think we are. And maybe we'll be surprised to realise the depth of experience, of qualifications and of capabilities.
I think there's definitely opportunity for capturing the minds of young lawyers and law students at certain pivotal points of their career. So if you look at the life cycle, like, you know, butterfly, caterpillar, butterfly, imagine like a little baby lawyer all the way through the potential transition points of their life cycle. There are opportunities, I think, where there could be more, you know, just I think information and ways to capture these. It doesn't sound very autonomous, but ways to capture, you know, a fledgling lawyer and keep them attracted to the bush or the country. And I mean, I think when I went to UNE, there was really not very. I don't think we even had any of these subjects. That was I graduated in 2014, and even the transition to do PLT was something that wasn't even really addressed in my bachelor's degree very much at all at that point. And I think that the one way to improve it is that we have all the regional law societies, which are wonderful to get involved in. If you're not already a member of your regional law society, it's the best way to get to know the other lawyers in your local area and to also have some ability to be involved in law reform and get involved in the law society committees and so forth. But I think there is a gap that needs to be fixed between university and the employers, and I think that that is the way to keep people in the areas where they're living and studying, is to have a better pathway, I think, and a better linkage between the employers in the areas and the PLT and university.
Annika, would you like to add anything there?
And I think Legal Aid have some good programs in this area. Katie, and recently we had a chat about Legal Aid's now got the graduate solicitor program for the criminal lawyers in regional areas. So and I think they've had some good results for their for that recently. So that could be something that could be modelled by other organisations in future.
I'll just make a quick point about one project that CALD were doing over a number of years, and that was an infographic that they would produce about graduate destinations to try to react to some of the media sometimes that it's no use studying law because there's too many lawyers. And everyone in this room knows that there's not enough lawyers most of the time in many places. So it wasn't ever disaggregated between 3R, 4R and other places to work, but it was an attempt to show that probably 40 to 50% of law graduates become admitted lawyers. And as a sense of hope, there's all sorts of things you can do with a law degree, but also there's all sorts of opportunities and career paths and educational benefits of studying law and becoming a practicing lawyer, because there aren't too many lawyers. But if you were to do that through a different lens of 3R, 4R, and to describe the types of work that is understaffed for lawyers, that's an infographic that would be startling, I think.
I think some of the, I won't say positive propaganda, but some of the good material that students have responded to, in my experience, in hearing about opportunities and seeing different faces of what law and Triple R can look like, has been a long time ago. There was actually a CLC New South Wales publication, Real Lawyers, Adventure Lawyering. Lawyers, do you know the one I'm talking about? No, okay. Mel's nodding, but there was also the CLC New South Wales or CLCA snippet YouTube clips still around from a conference a number of years ago. I know here with the media that's happening, CLC New South Wales looking at doing a few more of those little Fox Pops things, because it is through different media that students are interacting and they want to see it. They want to have a face in front of them, like to hear about particular roles and locations. So even the Triple R profiles, Annika, that the Law Council has now loaded onto their Triple R committee or Triple R site, yeah, onto their page. So I think it's sort of a low investment opportunity, I think, for us to build some of those resources that put new opportunities to students frequently.
Sorry, I'll just sneak one idea in, and Judy's got a point. We teach with a law textbook in first year, which, beyond attempting to teach statutory interpretation, it has this wonderful profile of probably 100 lawyers throughout the textbook. So, just what a wonderful idea the publishers and the authors had of that textbook, of actually being able to introduce potential careers for lawyers in a law textbook. And it's a page, it's half a page, but gosh, it's so human and it's so important and it's so contemporary and it's so useful. Judy.
I just wanted to ask a question about the National Legal Assistance Workforce Strategy, which doesn't exist, but it is a commitment in the new National Access to Justice Partnership. I think that's what it's called. So the Commonwealth has committed with the states and territories to develop this thing. And my understanding is that when this thing is developed, it will be the first time in Australia that a legal workforce strategy has existed and a legal assistance workforce strategy has existed. So the 4Rs network has done quite a bit of work around that during the review of the previous partnership agreement, and suggested that that type of strategy is essential, and that it should link in law schools, because law schools at the moment don't connect with the issue of legal workforce in a formal way. So they don't have a plan, and the PLT group don't either. So two of the major contributors to legal workforce are not focusing on the issue in that sense, and they're certainly not focusing on 3 or 4Rs. So that probably means that there's an opportunity for organisations to get strategic and focused about what is it about legal education PLT and other factors that contribute to workforce supply, recruitment and retention in 4Rs areas, that should be in that strategy. And assuming that there's going to need to be funding that accompanies that strategy, and that's not agreed, so the Commonwealth maybe will just see it as a document that somehow is going to self-implement. But assuming that there needs to be funding, what does the funding need to be for? Who needs to receive it? How much and for how long? So there we are. There's at least 3 questions.
And therefore really big questions. I don't think I can answer that today, but the fragmentation issues that you've spoken about, I think is really the critical factor that needs to be resolved, in that the most important players need to actually sit down and have a proper conversation and be able to have a coherent strategy working together towards the ultimate goal, which I think is what's lacking in this area.
I'll just say that obviously law schools and PLT providers should partner in some sort of way to support the development of that strategy or the implementation of that strategy. At times, if I'm not speaking too much out of school, universities in the current climate are all about revenue and budgets and how can we entice the hardworking lawyers who we once trained to return to do postgraduate studies. But there's also a market that universities often think about, which is short courses, professional courses, other interactions, other supports that could feed directly into strategy development, strategy implementation and maintenance and retention. And surely this is part of what a university's connection to a community is, or to a profession is. And, there are universities out there, including our own, that talk about being a university for the professions. And workforce strategy of a profession is what a university for the professions should probably be about.
Maybe we should get universities to publish their stats of graduates' employment. Are these published? Like, yeah.
It's a notoriously difficult data set to get accurately verified, so it's often about the alumni network feeling comfortable to spam their alumni about what they're doing. And it is one of the weakest data sets that universities have at times, but there are national and discipline and professional focused alumni sort of surveys about graduate destinations. It's a starting point, but it's not perfect data.
And I think probably one of the problems, though, is the way the PLT program is so disjointed and delivered in such different manners through different universities. Some universities do it internally, some you go to College of Law, and really that's a failing in the pathway from, law student to admitted solicitor, is because of that, the way there's so many kind of different delivery options and there's not a clear pathway, and that's where people are falling through the cracks when they could be really captured and directed into the beautiful Port Macquarie area or alternate locations.
And that is something under review. So Annika, is there anything you'd like to add there on behalf of your role on the working group for APLEX review of the national standards? I feel like there's a hot potato here that's just being passed from one to the other. So
I might throw to something completely different. Just a couple of points. One is just the obvious point that hasn't really been thrashed out. I don't think that the economics of it, that you can make a lot more money as a lawyer in the city than you can in the country, albeit we're all motivated by the responsibility of promoting justice in the community. I got my law degree from UNE in 2006 externally, and I've worked in the Mid-North Coast since then, initially in general practice and then more part-time over the years since, and doing mediation more often. Each year or so, I wonder whether I'll give it away and look at the costs of practicing certificate, insurances, CLE. And CLE, I notice with other country lawyers that we often find it quite a burden to spend, you know, suddenly $600 for an afternoon's webinar from Sydney or something. And that'll just get you a couple of points for the 12 points you have to get. So there's that tyranny of distance for us in the country. And if you want to borrow a book from the Law Society, they'll send it up to you for free, but then you've got to pay $50 for 2 books to send back. You know, there's sort of some of the stresses that you weigh up every couple of years working part-time. Do I actually need to keep up the lawyering?
Thanks. Do we have anyone who'd like to respond to that?
I've had that experience too, having to post the books back, and it's painful. I agree. Yeah. But some of those issues are all things you can raise with the Law Society, because really, you know, they're a membership-based organisation, and it's supporting their regional members is an important part of their role. And yeah, I mean, you know, why can't we get reply paid envelopes? And so there are some inequities, and there is no doubt that the services that are available to city members for some of these organisations, they have a lot more services available to them, which in the country you wouldn't. So there's no reason why people can't advocate to those bodies that they're members of, that some of their membership funds be used to in other ways to support regional practitioners in that way.
I agree. And also letting them know if sometimes there's something that's taking place in person in Sydney or perhaps Melbourne, and it looks terrific, but they're not offering an online streaming option. Sometimes I've just sent an email and said, hey, this would be great to roll out broader. Like, why can't you?
Just with a completely different hat on, I work with the Australian New Zealand Association of Psychiatry, Psychology and Law as part of the editorial work I do for their journal. But all the branches of that organisation, including a New Zealand branch, have online seminars, have an annual conference, you know, professional, and to some extent what we do in our LLB with some publicly available seminars and such things. These are the options that are now hybrid or online more often than not. And if any of those opportunities help for CLE, CPD type of points as they do for psychiatrists, psychologists, you know, that it's worthwhile coming to those of us who are involved in those interdisciplinary associations, because often the discussion is about law in the context of psychiatry, psychology, for example.
Thank you. Well, in the interest of time, because we have a very short break coming up, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the panelists, including Annika, who's joined us online, and to the audience for your participation. I know that I am inspired daily by my colleagues in this sector, and I just wish I could kind of bundle you all up and take you into class, or, you know, get you before students. So yes, you are always welcome. Now, so I think that concludes our session. Thank you again. And I believe we've got just a 15-minute break.